Good morning. We're back on the road again. This time we're a little further south in the Central Coast in the area known as Los Olivos. More specifically, we are at a winery known as Area 51, and we have a true treat here. The owner and winemaker, Andrew Murray, is with us. And Andrew, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to see you.
So I've been drinking your wines for quite a while, but I would like the audience to know that what you're doing here and what varietals do well down here, and you're you're getting a lot of accolades as a winemaker, and so we'd like to hear your story.
Don't hold that against us. So yes, we're here in the middle of Area 51. It's where Andrew Murray Vineyards calls its home, and the winery itself is the original Firestone Walker Brewery, and I haven't always been here. We only moved to this exact spot in 2005. I was lucky enough to get started in the wine business here in Los Olivos back in 1990. And ironically, it's also the same year I graduated high school. So I've been doing this literally since I graduated high school. You know, some people brew beer in their dorm rooms, and I did that too, but I got straight into wine. So I was very fortunate. My folks were in the restaurant business all throughout Southern California, and sort of raised me in this loving fine cuisine, traveling with them through Europe, and enjoying fine wines. So when we had the opportunity to visit the Rhone Valley for the first time, I was able to really fall in love with the Rhone varieties over there. And then we planted a 50-acre vineyard on a 200-acre ranch just down the street. It's less than a couple miles away. And that's where Andrew Murray Vineyards actually started. And so we kept our name, even though we sold our vineyard back in 2005. And we moved here. And so we've been making our wines here at Area 51 ever since. We're still trying to find this place. So I'm glad you guys found it today.
Yeah. So you talk about Rhone varietals. Is what in this area, what about this area makes Rhone varietals do so well?
Yeah, let's talk about the climate of this place. Okay. You know, people love to think that Sonoma Coast, Mendocino Coast, Russian River are very cool places because they make wonderful Pinot Noir. We are, right here where we are cooler in general than any one of those places in their cooler years. So we're in a very cool climate. If you look at the geography of France, you know, we've got Champagne up at the extreme north, then we've got Burgundy, and then we've got at the coast, we've got Bordeaux. Rhone Valley is right there in the middle of it all. It's sort of in a temperate middle zone. It's in nowhere land. It's not as cool as Burgundy. It's not as warm as Bordeaux. So what can you do there? Well, they've made Rhone varieties there for millennia. So the Rhone varieties require a very moderate, temperate climate. You know, here we are halfway through October, and it's just a perfect fall day. I mean, this is what it's like here day in and day out. So it's a great place to ripen Syrah. And then, and the reason why it's so special is in this part of California, as opposed to Northern California, where we have border mountains. They actually run, you know, north-south right along the coast, and they actually insulate the inland valleys of the Napa Valley, the Sonoma County. They keep it warmer than it would be otherwise because the ocean would make it too cold. Here we have these transverse ranges. They actually run from west to east, and so we funnel these cool breezes that you're feeling are literally funneled right off the coast. So we are very foggy in the morning. The fog rolls in the evening, and it rolls back out during the day. It's just dewy, dripping wet here every morning. But every day it has a chance to, you know, ripen in this beautiful warm sun. We have wonderful soils. The Rhone varieties thrive in ancient maritime soils. So here we have a lot of sand. We have we have a good healthy bit of clay and loam as well, but there's just a little bit of diatomaceous earth, which is that chalkiness that helps preserve the natural acidity of the wines from this area. So right where we are, it's too warm for Pinot Noir, and it's too cool for Cabernet proper. People do grow Cabernet right here, but it's better with the cooler Bordeaux varieties like Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, maybe even Merlot. No one drinks Merlot around here anymore since the movie Sideways, but it's still planted here and there. So we feel it's almost by process of elimination, it's one of the best suited places for these Rhone varieties, you know, for Syrah in particular. So
Syrah,
long-winded, but
not at all. Syrah being your big red. What are some of the whites that are doing well here?
yeah. So right here proper, we have Roussanne and Grenache Blanc planted. So those are our Rhone whites, and they're what make up the famous wines of Châteauneuf-du-Pape Blanc. Most people hardly even remember that they make white wines down there, but they very much do. It's a great place for those beautiful, you know, hauntingly aromatic whites. A little bit heavier than another variety that we grow here, Viognier, which is much more ephemeral and lighter, much more aromatic, a little bit brighter in acidity. And so, yeah, we have Viognier just a stone's throw from here. We're actually still hanging it this year for late harvest. We're going to pick it with a potential alcohol of about 12%, with about 6 to 8% residual sugar, and it'll be gorgeous. So those are our three main, actually our only three whites that we do here at the winery.
So we're going to move over now to a different location, watch a little bit of the production, and find out why Andrew Murray's wines are unique and what he does to make them what they are. Hello again. Here we are inside the barrel room at Andrew Murray, and we're going to talk to Andrew a little bit about some of the stylistic decisions that he makes to make such great wines.
Yeah, I want to say that the most important decision a winemaker makes, and I think it's the most important way that we make our wines, is in the field. So, you know, if we're not taking care of the vineyards, if we're not taking care of yields, you know, if we didn't plant the darn thing in the right place in the first place, we're not going to make good wine. You know, we're not alchemists. You know, people have for years tried to divine, you know, gold out of lead. So if you have lead, you're going to make lead wine. You know, it's going to be dreadful. So that's the most important stylistic decision we can make, is not only, you know, going way back where to plant your vineyard, you know, which general area to do it in, and then it's the date of harvest. So that determines your style. Is it going to be a riper wine with bolder, riper flavors? Is it going to be a leaner wine, picked a little early, you know, for wonderful, rich acids? You know, a little bit leaner, a little bit, you know, we say nervy or taut in the wine business. So, and frankly, we do Syrah in all of those styles. So Syrah is this wonderful chameleon of a variety that can express itself very differently in different vineyards around the Central Coast, around the state, or around the Western United States, around the world. But we're focusing on, obviously, on just Syrah that's grown within a few miles of the winery. So there's not a lot of geographical diversity here. Soils are very similar, climate's very similar. So we make picking decisions to sort of tweak the wines. So we'll pick Syrah early, especially early in the harvest. We'll get wonderfully bright acids, a little lower color because it hasn't reached phenolic ripeness out on the vine. And then we'll bring some stuff in like now. We're going to bring in some Syrah next week. It's very late in the harvest this year. It's a very early harvest, so this Syrah is particularly ripe. We'll run it over my sorting table, so we won't have any raisoning inside the wine, but we'll achieve incredibly ripe, rich, dark flavors. And then some of our wines are blended, so we'll use both of those two qualities and several other qualities in a single wine. And sometimes we're seeking out singularities, where we actually want a specific vineyard or a specific clone or a specific style that we've picked in a single wine. And that's where it's fun to be a winemaker,
sure,
is that I get to force those decisions on the grapes and then ultimately on the consumer. So hopefully
mad scientist.
Yeah, they come along for the ride. Yeah.
So on your Syrahs, we just talked about picking early, picking late, blending. Do you also select different yeasts, say, for your early, to bring out more, or to help enhance, say, the acidic quality that you're looking for in a young or early picked grape? Do you do different yeasts, and how does that work?
Yeah, we tend to inoculate or add yeast to all of our fermentations here.
Okay.
We use about 4 different yeast, 5 sometimes for Syrah. And yes, we use specific yeast to correlate with specific styles. There are some yeasts that promote fruitiness. Mm-hmm. There are some yeasts that actually promote a lower potential alcohol, if you could believe that. There are yeasts that definitely have some characteristics that are special. But in general, you know, I went to UC Davis, so I've got a bit of a geeky winemaking degree background. I say a BS in wine is what it is. Double BS. You learn that those characteristics are minutia. I mean, very few people could discern those differences, and I've got to be honest, I can rarely discern the differences. What you notice more is the kinetics of fermentation, is how quickly it'll ferment your wine. And so we want a very slow, even fermentation. You know, we're in our barrel room. We've got a lot of our little small lot fermenters in here. These are all 1.5 tons. We keep this room at 55 degrees. It's a very slow, cool fermentation. We also do some in the opposite side of the winery, in the tank room, where it doesn't get the same level of refrigeration and it's warmer. So we can use a slower fermenting yeast in there because it's warmer in there.
Okay.
And it'll naturally warm up. And heat sort of changes the kinetics of fermentation. The warmer they are, the faster they'll go. And that produces very different wines. You can have quick fermentations that are very extractive, that get a lot of tannin, a lot of color out of a wine. You can have much cooler that sort of promote the earthy, the savory characters in a wine.
So that slow fermentation, that's what you're going for more of that earthy, the savory.
Yeah, but we blend again. You know, we don't do anything just one way. So that would be troubling for me. It's not like it's an experiment. We're doing the same process over and over again every year for about 20 years now. But it's a controlled level of experimentation. So we want to have diversity so that the other way to be a winemaker is to blend. Mm-hmm. You know, we're looking around in here. We have about 750 barrels in here. Everything gets barreled. It's all French oak barrels. A lot of it's very neutral. You know, it's 5 to 10 years old. We have a lot of 1 to 2 year old or brand new wood as well, but it's predominantly older wood. So all of our wines, separate lots, will actually go to barrels separate, and then the winemaker comes out of me again just before bottling when we're blending. So that's why we want all this diversity. I don't want to have one giant tank if everything's the same, because then I have no options.
Sure.
So.
Okay, so we're looking into a tank of some Syrah, and one of the unique things is you'll notice there's a few berries that aren't red. They're actually white grapes. So I wanted to ask Andrew why and what the goal is for this co-fermentation with two different varietals.
Yeah, so we had this single vineyard wine called the Roasted Slope, and it was the vineyard wasn't intentionally planted that way. It was actually a nursery mistake that was sort of propagated by Klein Nurseries, Klein Winery, which is a very prominent winery up in Sonoma Valley, and they had asked Duarte Nurseries to grow cuttings for them, and then they grew too many, so they decided to sell some of their cuttings. And Viognier wasn't very popular in California. This was back in 1990. So we heard about it, and we were planted a bunch of Syrah already, so we asked for some Viognier, and the Viognier was all misidentified. It was actually all Syrah. And so we planted this whole 6-acre vineyard, and we thought it was Viognier, and it was not. It was all Syrah. But as vines died and as we expanded the vineyard, we added Viognier. It was a big mix, and so, life gives you lemons, you make lemonade, and so we were always inspired by Côte Rôtie, so we called this wine the direct translation, the Roasted Slope. And it was a sought-after wine. We got a lot of great press for it, but then we ceased production when we sold the vineyard, and we just started making the Watch Hill Syrah, which is a vineyard right here in Los Alamos, nice cool part of this valley. And we realized in the first couple years that we made Watch Hill that it was missing something. And so we started intentionally picking some Viognier and co-fermenting it. We started at 2 or 3%, and now we're up to 4%, which is our style. And it's not a lot, right? I mean, 4% seems like you should barely be able to tell. But Syrah can lean towards the meaty or towards the earthy, towards the savory side, and the Viognier helps lift the aromatics. It helps bring out those ephemeral, sort of pretty side of Viognier, of Syrah, which is more like candied violets and some of the floral notes. And so it really helps promote that. And researchers at UC Davis and other sort of universities around the world have noticed that when you co-ferment, when you actually have white with red, it's counterintuitive, but it actually makes the wine darker. So the whites, it turns out, have more phenolics in their skins and in their seeds, in their berries, typically than a lot of reds. So those phenolics, those tannins, actually help preserve and fix the color early on in fermentation. So the wines tend to be darker. So it's very counterintuitive, but it's a wonderful bonus. So our Watch Hill Vineyard Syrah, if you seek out a bottle, it's nearly opaque. It's black. And it's that bright red color that you saw. It's almost like cranberry juice. It's impossibly dark, but it's so balanced because it's not a warm climate Syrah. It's got great acid, and the Viognier helps keep it light on its feet. So it's pretty cool.
Very interesting. All right, we're going to move on and talk about the winery itself and plans for the future. So here we are in the tank room, and Andrew's going to tell us a little bit about what happens here during harvest and fermentation.
Yeah, welcome to my messy world. So these larger tanks behind us are very similar to our little 1.5 ton fermenters. When we use these, it means that we're getting fruit from a larger vineyard or a larger block. So these hold 1.5 tons. The big boys here hold 12 tons. They're 3,300 gallon tanks. And there is a soupy mess inside of each one of these, just like inside of these little bins. So we get the whole berries, which is inclusive of the seeds and the pulp and the skins and everything. These aren't pressed. There's just a big soup inside of these. And in the bottom of every tank, we've got stainless steel sieves, basically, a screen, and that allows us to get free run. We just drain the wine into the sump, which is called a sump. It drains into there, it adds a little bit of oxygen, and then we pump it up over the top. And then we actually have a device called an irrigator. It's a cap irrigator, and it just sprinkles the wine back over the top. And we're not doing this really until we start getting active fermentation. So when it's just in the juice stage, it's just sitting in here cold. And we call it a pre-fermentation maceration. This tank behind us is in the throes, like the deepest, darkest, most wonderful moments of fermentation. It's raging. This tank is 85 degrees. It's, literally, you got to feel that. It is warm to the touch. So that is one of the byproducts of fermentation are CO2, heat, and my favorite part, the ethanol, the alcohol. It makes wine so wonderfully delicious and makes conversations usually a whole lot more interesting. We all look a little better. So that's what's going on in here. So we just have different tanks based on different lot sizes. So these hold 12, those hold 5, these hold 4. And then here again, just our little vats hold just 1.5 tons. When fermentation is done, when it's dry, there's no more sugar left, when we taste the wine and determine that it no longer needs to be on skins, we use the sump again, and that's what we actually did this morning. And it's a bit of a bear of a job. So you imagine it's filled almost to the top. It's filled with skins and now wine, still a lot of residual CO2. So we drain all the free run wine off, and that's what this whole setup was doing. It was draining the free run wine out of a tank in the corner to this press tank over here. So, and they're sized perfectly. When you empty that tank, it fills that tank. So, and it'll sit in there for a day before it goes into barrel. So we just want to let some of the crazy solids, the dead yeast cells and whatever else in there, sink to the bottom. And then we'll rack into barrel. But once you drain all the free run wine out, you've got about 5 tons of solids, of the grape bits. The must, the marc, the pumice as we call it. And that all has to be raked out, and then you jump inside, clearly with fans and safety equipment, and then we shovel that out into 1/2-ton bins, and then we drive it all the way out to our press and dump it in our press. And we're actually pressing right now, so we're pressing all those 12 tons of Syrah that we're in there.
And that light press will get the residual juice that you want back and blend it back.
Yeah, so what happens is as the wine ferments, those berries are breaking, they're releasing a lot of the wine effectively, but it's still leaving a lot close to the seeds, close to the pulp, just sort of tied up in the pulp, almost like a sponge, if you will. And our goal is to gently squeeze it and get that wine back out of there. So it's very gentle. We don't break seeds, we don't shear skins, we don't want any excess tannin because we're tasting the wine and we say it's ready to go. So we don't want to increase the tannin by having it pressed too hard. But you do get to the more tannic portion of the wine. And with this Syrah, we decided to keep it together. With some of our Syrahs, we actually keep the pressed wine separate.
That's what I was just
So
gonna
yeah,
ask.
so you can make press cuts. You know, some people love to say, "Oh, I only use free run," and I think free run can be too soft. I don't think it has some of the tannin that we're looking for. Most of our wines get a proper 18 months in French oak barrels, so they're gonna soften their tannins over time. And then our wines are usually very approachable, but they also age quite well, and those tannins help promote that age worthiness. So I'm not afraid of the tannin. So.
That's well, many of you probably didn't know that Andrew Murray has a Ferrari. And what I'm referring to when I say that is the state-of-the-art machine behind us is actually a little different than a lot of bottlers, corkers, so to speak. This is a machine that puts the twist tops on all of Andrew's wines. And I wanted to talk briefly about these closures and why they're consistently successful, and why they're recommended, and why Andrew has chosen to spend obviously a lot of money on doing it state of the art.
Yeah, so we're so committed here to every aspect of the fermentation process, from the winemaking process, you know, from maintaining, owning, leasing vineyards, having under long-term contracts, all the way through to really the most sensitive yet important part of winemaking, and a lot of people overlook this part, is the bottling. They just sub it out because bottling lines take up space that you rarely use, and they take up a lot of capital. Bottling lines are not cheap, so most people hire out mobile bottling lines. But the problem with those, and we've used them in the past, is that you don't know whose wine they just used or who they just bottled. You don't know what kind of funky bits might be living in those wines. Are they the groovy new natural wineries that don't use anything in their wines? They may be just full of spoilage organisms. So we're a little bit anal retentive about our sanitation, our cleanliness here with winemaking, because we want to make the most natural wines possible. So we have determined, back in 2005, 2006, we were a very early adopter, but we started using screw tops. I did hedge when I bought this machine. It does cork as well. So I didn't want to spend this much money and be that wrong. So, and that's partly why our machine is very special, is it actually has a corker head and a screw top head all on one very compact machine. So you alluded to it being like a Ferrari. It is very much Italian. And I will tell you that this is just a small version. Gallo runs like 5 of these machines that take up an entire warehouse, probably 5 times bigger than this winery, and they run 3 shifts a day. They close, I think they shut down for sanitation a couple hours. So you can do a tremendous amount of volume through these machines. We just have, a very small one. We can do about 1,000 cases a day, which is a long, awful day in the wine business, because bottling is just loud, it's stressful. You imagine you've grown your grapes, you fermented it, you put it in your barrel room, you've taken care of it, and then you've got to get it into bottle. And it's the day that it's the most sensitive. It's prone to oxidation. It's just prone, if your machine breaks down, it's a very sensitive moment in wine. So we try to counteract, any more sleepless nights that I might have by putting what we think is a fantastic closure. It's the Stelvin screw top. They've been in use for a very long time. Actually, they've been sealing wine for about 30 years. It's mostly emotional marketing that has sort of made these sort of less desirable, I think, out in the market than they can be or should be. A lot of people think, oh, it's metal. It's such a perfect closure that it will allow no oxygen into your wine post-bottling. And everyone knows, right, that wines are supposed to age and evolve. Sure. They're supposed to get better in the bottle, and it's oxygen. So I always challenge people with that, and I say, okay, yes, I can't blow through this, but try to blow through a cork. It's not like, volumes of oxygen. It's at the molecular level. It's, milligrams per liter over years. It's tiny amounts of oxygen. And what we use is a special liner in our Stelvin capsules that actually allows a finite, engineered, and predictable amount of oxygen into every bottle. So cork is a natural product.
Sure.
It's harvested from trees in Spain and Portugal predominantly. Not every no 2 trees are exactly alike. They do measure, and they have a lot of strict quality controls to get cork as good as it can be, and they've certainly gotten a lot better in the last several years. But this is engineered and finite, so it's predictable. It's absolutely, I know how much oxygen will get into every one of my bottles. That allows us to finish our wines with less sulfites. Sulfites are a hot topic today. Wines under cork tend to consume more sulfites post-bottling and during bottling than wines under screw, because again, it's a very slow, consistent level of oxygen ingress into your wine. Whereas with a cork, you get a lot right at the time of bottling, and then it's very slow for a while, but it's not predictable.
Sure.
You can have a good bottle and a bad bottle all in the same box. I will tell you, we've had no bad bottles since we switched, so I sleep a lot better knowing that our customers are getting exactly the wine that we want them to have. So
that's great. That's great. And I know I've had some of the wines that have been laying down for years and years, and they are remarkable. So I want to thank Andrew for his time today. This is fantastic. If you get a chance to come down to this area, a little off the beaten trail south of Santa Maria, it is a haven. Great wines, great wineries, and just a great vacation spot. Climate, as he alluded to earlier, is fantastic. But Andrew, I want to thank you, your staff, and everybody involved with Andrew Murray Vineyards.
it's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.